The phone rang at 6:47 inches the morning. I was already awake, sitting at my small kitchen table in my Calgary apartment, drinking instant coffee and watching the gray November sky lighten over the industrial park across the street. 23 years as a maintenance supervisor at an oil refinery had taught me to wake before dawn. Old habits. I didn't recognize the Toronto area code. Is this David Morrison? A woman's voice, professional, careful, speaking. Mr. Morrison, this is Jennifer Caldwell from Whitmore and Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of Patricia Ann Morrison. I understand you were her former husband? My hand tightened on the phone. Patricia. The coffee suddenly tasted like ash in my mouth. I was. A long time ago. I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Morrison. Mrs. Morrison passed away last Tuesday. The funeral is this Saturday at 11 a.m. at St. Michael's Cathedral in Toronto. As executor of her will, I'm required to inform you that your presence has been specifically requested at the reading of the will, which will take place immediately following the service. I stared at the phone like it had just spoken in ancient Greek. Patricia wanted me at her funeral? Patricia, who hadn't spoken to me in 19 years? Patricia, whose last words to me had been delivered through her lawyer, along with divorce papers that left me with nothing but my truck and my work boots? Mr. Morrison? Are you still there? Why would she want me there? A pause. I'm not at liberty to discuss the contents of the will over the phone, but Mrs. Morrison was very specific. She requested your presence, and she requested that you hear the will read in person. Will you be able to attend? I looked around my apartment. 400 square feet, furniture from Value Village, a hot plate because the stove didn't work and the landlord wouldn't fix it. The view of the oil refinery where I'd worked for 2 decades, where I'd been passed over for every promotion, where younger men called me Old Dave and asked me to fetch things. What business did I have at Patricia Morrison's funeral? Patricia, who'd become CEO of Tech North Solutions. Patricia, whose face I'd seen in business magazines at the grocery store checkout. Patricia, who'd built a $200 million company while I changed air filters and unclogged drains. Mr. Morrison, I'll be there. I hung up and sat very still, watching the steam rise from my coffee. The last time I'd been in Toronto was 19 years ago, March 2005. The day Patricia's lawyer had handed me the divorce papers in a glass tower downtown, in an office that cost more per month than I made in a year. The day I signed away everything we'd built together, walked out onto Bay Street in the rain, and took the overnight Greyhound back to Calgary with $3,200 in my bank account and nowhere to live. I hadn't seen my son Marcus since he was 19. Now he was 38. A corporate lawyer himself, I'd learned from the internet. Partner at some Bay Street firm. Engaged to a woman named Stephanie Chen, a surgeon. Their engagement photos had been in Toronto Life magazine 2 years ago. I'd bought a copy at the grocery store and kept it hidden in my desk drawer, looking at it sometimes when the loneliness got too heavy. Marcus looked just like Patricia. Same sharp cheekbones, same confident smile. In every photo, he looked like someone who'd never doubted himself for a single day. Someone who'd never known what it felt like to be invisible. I wondered if he even remembered me. The flight to Toronto cost $847, which was more than half my rent. I booked it anyway, along with 2 nights at a Holiday Inn near the airport. I pulled my only suit out of the closet, the same one I'd worn to my mother's funeral in 2018. It smelled like mothballs and regret. Saturday morning, I took the UP Express train downtown. The city had changed, glass towers everywhere, construction cranes, people in expensive coats hurrying past with takeaway coffee that cost $8 a cup. I felt like a ghost haunting my own past. St. Michael's Cathedral was the kind of place Patricia would have chosen. Gothic, impressive, the sort of venue that said success even in death. I arrived 40 minutes early and sat in the last pew, watching people file in. CEOs, politicians, tech industry, people in designer black. Every person who walked through those doors looked like they belonged in that world of power and money. Then I saw him, Marcus. He walked down the center aisle with Stephanie on his arm. Custom-tailored suit, probably $5,000. Confident stride. He shook hands with people, received condolences with practiced grace. He had Patricia's presence, that ability to command a room just by entering it. He didn't see me. Or, if he did, he didn't recognize the old man in the cheap suit sitting in the shadows. The service was beautiful and impersonal. A minister who'd clearly never met Patricia read generic platitudes. A business partner gave a speech about her vision and leadership. Marcus stood at the pulpit and delivered a eulogy about a mother who'd sacrificed everything for her son, who'd built an empire while raising him alone, who'd shown him what strength and determination looked like. I sat in the back and said nothing. After the service, people gathered in the cathedral's reception hall. I stood near the wall, drinking weak coffee from a paper cup, watching Marcus network even at his mother's funeral. He moved from group to group, always saying the right thing, always in control. Then he saw me. I watched the recognition move across his face. Confusion first, then something harder. He excused himself from the group he was with and walked over. Up close, he looked even more like Patricia. Same gray-green eyes, same way of looking at people, like he was calculating their net worth. David Morrison. He didn't call me Dad. I'm surprised you came. Your mother requested it. Did she? It wasn't a question. His jaw tightened. That's interesting, considering you abandoned us 19 years ago. The words hit like a physical blow, but I kept my face neutral. I'd had 19 years to build up scar tissue. I didn't abandon anyone, Marcus. Really? Because I remember coming home from university for spring break and finding Mom crying in the kitchen. I remember her telling me you'd left, that you'd taken money from the company, tried to extort her, and when she wouldn't give in to your demands, you walked away. I remember her working 18-hour days to save the company you nearly destroyed. So forgive me if I don't have a warm, fuzzy feeling about your presence here. Each word was precise, delivered like closing arguments in a courtroom. I wondered how many times he'd rehearsed this speech in his head over the years. That's what she told you? That's what happened. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. Let me be very clear about something, David. You won't get a penny from her estate. Whatever you're hoping for, whatever delusion brought you here, forget it. Mom's lawyers made sure of that years ago. Every asset is protected. You'll leave here with exactly what you deserve. Nothing. Stephanie appeared at his elbow, touching his arm gently. Marcus. Miss Caldwell is ready to begin. He straightened his tie. We're done here. They walked away. I stood there with my paper cup of terrible coffee, feeling every one of my 64 years, and followed them to the conference room. The reading took place in a wood-paneled room that smelled like furniture, polish, and old money. 23 people sat in leather chairs around a massive oak table. Board members, executives, Patricia's sister Caroline, Marcus, and Stephanie. I was directed to a chair near the back, separate from the main group. Jennifer Caldwell, the lawyer I'd spoken to on the phone, was younger than I expected. Mid-30s, dark suit, the kind of careful competence that came from handling very wealthy clients. She had several folders in front of her and a laptop open beside them. Thank you all for coming, she began. I know this is a difficult time. Mrs. Morrison was very specific about how she wanted her final wishes carried out. She recorded a video message to be played before the reading of her will. If everyone is ready, she turned the laptop around. Patricia appeared on screen. She looked older, thinner. The cancer had taken its toll, but her eyes were the same sharp gray-green, and her voice still had that CEO command. If you're watching this, I'm gone. Patricia spoke directly to the camera. To my colleagues, my board, my friends, thank you for everything. To my sister Caroline, thank you for always being there. To Marcus, she paused, and something shifted in her expression. To my son, I need to tell you some things you don't know. Things I should have told you years ago but didn't have the courage to face while I was alive. You're going to hear things today that will change how you see me, how you see your father, how you see yourself. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Around the table, people shifted in their seats. In 2004, TechNorth Solutions was in trouble. We'd overextended on 3 major contracts. Our cash flow was critical. The company was going to fail, and I was going to lose everything. You were 19, Marcus. You were at Queen's University, doing so well. I couldn't let you see me fail. I couldn't let everything I'd built collapse. Patricia's hands trembled slightly on screen. So I did something illegal. I manipulated our financial reports to our investors. I showed profits that didn't exist. I secured funding based on falsified documents. It worked. The company survived. But what I did was securities fraud. If it had been discovered, I would have gone to prison for 10 to 15 years. The company would have been destroyed. Our investors would have lost millions. And you, Marcus, would have been the son of a criminal. The room was absolutely silent. Your father found out. David discovered the discrepancies in the books. He was our accountant, and he was good at his job. He came to me with the evidence, and I broke down. I told him everything. I begged him to help me fix it, to help me cover it up, and he said no. On screen, Patricia's eyes filled with tears. He said no because it was the right thing to do. He wanted me to come clean, face the consequences. But I couldn't do that. I couldn't go to prison. I couldn't let you see me that way, Marcus. So I gave David a choice. I told him I'd found evidence that he was the one who'd falsified the documents, that he'd been embezzling money, that I had enough proof to send him to prison instead of me. I told him I'd already shown my lawyers in the board preliminary evidence. I told him that if he went to the authorities with the truth, I'd destroy him first, and I had enough power and money to make it stick. Marcus's face had gone pale. I gave him an option. Leave quietly, take the divorce, take nothing, sign an NDA, and never come back. Let me tell you and everyone else that he was the criminal. Let his reputation be destroyed instead of mine. In exchange, I'd leave him free. No prosecution, no prison, just exile. Patricia wiped her eyes with a tissue. He chose exile. For you, Marcus. Because if I'd gone to prison, your father would have been raising a 19-year-old alone, with no money, no company, with his mother's criminal trial splashed across every newspaper in Canada. Your future would have been destroyed. Medical school applications, law school applications, they all ask about parental criminal history. David knew that. He knew that me going to prison would ruin your life, so he took the blame. He let me paint him as a thief and a liar. He let you hate him. He spent 19 years working manual labor jobs, living in poverty, never defending himself, never telling you the truth, because he loved you more than he loved his own reputation. I sat very still, watching Marcus. His hands were gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Stephanie had her hand over her mouth. The truth is, I was the criminal. I was the fraud. Everything you've admired about me, Marcus, everything you thought I built through hard work and integrity, was built on a lie. And it was sustained by destroying a good man who didn't deserve what I did to him. Patricia leaned toward the camera. I've lived with this guilt for 19 years. I became successful, yes. I built the company into something worth $200 million. But every success felt hollow because I knew the price. I knew what I'd done to David, what I'd taken from him, what I'd made you believe about your own father. I was too much of a coward to tell you while I was alive, Marcus. I was afraid you'd hate me, afraid you'd see me for what I really was. So I'm telling you now, when I can't face the consequences. And I'm sorry. I'm so desperately sorry. The video ended. The room was silent, except for the sound of someone crying softly. I looked up and saw it was Caroline, Patricia's sister. She was staring at me with horror and sympathy. Jennifer Caldwell cleared her throat. There's more to the will, but I think we should take a moment. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He looked at me, and I saw everything Patricia had just destroyed in his eyes. Every belief he'd held about his childhood, about his mother, about me. Marcus, I said quietly. He turned and walked out of the room. Stephanie followed him. We sat in silence for 3 minutes. Then Jennifer Caldwell continued. Mrs. Morrison's will is quite specific. To her sister Caroline, she leaves her personal jewelry and a trust fund of $5 million. To various charities, another $15 million. To her board members and key executives, stock options and bonuses, totaling approximately $30 million. To her son, Marcus Morrison. She paused. Mrs. Morrison leaves the sum of $1, along with a letter. The shock around the table was palpable. The remainder of her estate, including all shares in Tech North Solutions, her properties, her investments, and all remaining assets, valued at approximately $150 million, she leaves to David Morrison, her former husband. Additionally, she established a legal team to prepare a full exoneration of Mr. Morrison, including signed confessions and documentation of the fraud she committed in 2004. She has requested that these documents be filed with the appropriate authorities to clear his name from any and all accusations. She has also established a $10 million fund specifically for Mr. Morrison to use as he sees fit, with no restrictions. I couldn't breathe. Jennifer turned to me. Mr. Morrison, there's a letter for you as well. She handed me an envelope. My hands shook as I opened it. David, no amount of money can give you back the 19 years I stole from you. No confession can restore your relationship with our son. No legal exoneration can erase the damage I did to your reputation, your career, your life. But I can give you this: financial security, the truth on record, the company you helped build, that you should have shared in all along. I know you'll use it better than I did. You'll use it with integrity. You'll help people. You'll do good things. I'm sorry isn't enough. It will never be enough. I hope someday Marcus understands what you sacrificed for him. I hope someday he can forgive both of us. Me for what I did, and you for not telling him the truth sooner. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. Patricia. I sat there holding the letter, feeling the weight of 19 years pressing down on my chest. Around the table, people were whispering, staring at me. Caroline was crying openly now. Someone touched my shoulder. I looked up to see Marcus standing there. His face was red, tears streaming down his cheeks. I'm sorry, he choked out. Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I thought. God, I thought you abandoned us. I thought you were the monster. I said such terrible things to you in the hallway. I've spent 19 years hating you for something you didn't do, and you never once tried to defend yourself. Why didn't you tell me? I stood up slowly, my joints aching. I was an old man, 64 years old, with a bad back and hands that hurt from 2 decades of manual labor. Because your mother was right, I said quietly. If she'd gone to prison, your future would have been destroyed. You wouldn't have gotten into law school. You wouldn't have this career. You wouldn't have this life. I couldn't let that happen to you. You were my son. I am your son. He was sobbing now. I am your son, and I called you David. I told you that you'd get nothing. I said you abandoned us. How can you even look at me? I pulled him into a hug. He was taller than me now, broader, but he collapsed against my shoulder like he was 9 years old again. Because you're still my son, I said. That never changed. Not once. We stood there in that conference room full of millionaires and executives, and my son cried into my shoulder while I held him and felt something broken inside me slowly start to heal. Later, after the lawyers had gone through the rest of the will, after people had filed out in shocked silence, after Caroline had hugged me and apologized through tears for believing Patricia's lies, Marcus and I sat alone in the conference room. The $1, I said. Why did she do that to you? Marcus shook his head. There was a second letter. For me. He pulled it out of his pocket. She said she wanted me to understand what you felt like. Walking away with nothing. Watching someone else have everything you should have shared. She said it was my punishment for believing her lies, for treating you the way I did, for never once questioning her version of events. She said maybe losing the inheritance would teach me to value people over money, the way you always had. That's cruel. No, he wiped his eyes. It's fair. I don't deserve her money. You do. You earned it. You paid for it with 19 years of your life. Marcus. Dad. He said the word like he was testing it out, seeing how it felt. Can I call you that again? You never should have stopped. We sat in silence for a while. Then Marcus asked, What are you going to do? With all that money? I thought about my apartment in Calgary, the refinery, 23 years of maintenance work, the loneliness, the cheap coffee and the used furniture, and the view of industrial buildings. I don't know, I admitted. I never imagined having anything again. Well, Marcus smiled slightly, though his eyes were still red. You've got time to figure it out, and if you want, I'd like to help. I'd like to be part of your life again, if you'll let me. I have 19 years to make up for. I looked at my son, really looked at him. He had Patricia's face, but his grandmother's eyes. Morrison eyes. My eyes. I'd like that very much. We left the cathedral together, as the sun was setting over Toronto. The city lights were coming on, reflecting off the glass towers. Marcus put his arm around my shoulder. Stephanie wants to meet you properly, he said. Maybe we could have dinner? Nothing fancy. Just family. Family. I'd forgotten what that word felt like. I'd love that, son. We walked down Bay Street, past the tower where I'd signed the divorce papers 19 years ago, past the life I'd lost and the life I was getting back. The November air was cold, but I didn't feel it. For the first time in 19 years, I felt warm. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in a lawyer's office in Calgary, signing the papers to donate $50 million to establish the Morrison Foundation for wrongfully accused. I'd spent the last weeks reading about people like me, people who'd been blamed for things they didn't do, who'd lost years of their lives to false accusations, people who had no voice, no power, no money to fight back. I could give them that now. Marcus had flown out to be there for the signing. He'd also quietly started legal proceedings to have his name changed to Marcus Morrison Chen after his marriage. Morrison first, he'd told me, so everyone knows whose son I am. The foundation would provide legal support, financial assistance, and advocacy for people fighting to clear their names. It would fund investigations, pay for lawyers, support families. It would be Patricia's money, finally doing some good. I kept $20 million for myself. Enough to live comfortably, to never worry about money again. Enough to help Marcus and his future children. Enough to finally rest. The rest, everything else, went to causes Patricia would have hated. Support for whistleblowers, ethics in business programs, scholarships for kids whose parents were incarcerated. I bought a modest house in Calgary with a view of the mountains instead of the refinery. I retired from the maintenance job. I started seeing a therapist to work through 19 years of trauma and loneliness. And every Sunday, Marcus called me, just to talk. About work, about Stephanie, about their wedding plans, about everything and nothing. On Christmas Eve, he flew out with Stephanie to spend the holidays with me in my new house. We made dinner together, the three of us in my kitchen, and it felt like coming home. As we sat around the table, Marcus raised his glass. To second chances, he said. To the truth, Stephanie added. I looked at my son and his beautiful fiancée, at the life I'd thought I'd lost forever, at the family I was getting back piece by piece. To love, I said quietly, even when it costs everything. We drank together as snow fell outside the window, and I thought about Patricia, about the woman I'd loved, who'd betrayed me, who'd destroyed me, who'd finally, in the end, tried to make it right. It wasn't enough to erase 19 years. It never could be. But it was enough to start healing. It was enough to forgive. And sometimes, that's all we get. The chance to start over. The chance to rebuild. The chance to be seen for who we really are, instead of who people thought we were. I'd spent 19 years invisible. Now, finally, I was seen. And that was worth more than any inheritance.